You wouldn't believe how quickly a small piece of paper in the mail turned my world upside down. One sunny morning, I pulled a letter from my mailbox, expecting bills or junk mail, but instead I found a foreclosure notice from my HOA. The reason? An unpaid fine for $55. Yes, $55. My hands trembled as I reread the words, stunned that such a minor fee could threaten my entire home. The very place where I'd raised my children, mowed the lawn every weekend, and waved to neighbors for years. What made it worse was the sheer absurdity. I had never received a warning, no reminder, no second notice, just a sudden declaration that I was about to lose everything over what most people spend on groceries. Something didn't add up. I knew I was a good neighbor, respectful, quiet, and always kept my property tidy. So why was this happening to me? As I stood on my front porch that morning, heart racing and mind spinning, I realized this wasn't just a mistake. It was a message. Someone wanted me gone. And I had a feeling I knew exactly who. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't going down without a fight. And with my father, an intimidating attorney with a reputation for justice, on my side, this little fine was about to turn into something far bigger. Every day, it became clearer that Karen, my next-door neighbor, was more than just nosy. She was a manipulator, pulling strings behind the scenes to control our HOA, like it was her personal kingdom. While I tried to be a respectful, quiet neighbor, mowing my lawn, keeping my home in good condition, and staying out of drama, Karen always seemed to find fault with everything I did. A rustling tree branch, a complaint, my car parked slightly crooked, another violation notice. It was relentless, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was targeting me on purpose. What angered me the most wasn't just her constant need to control others, it was how she seemed to have the full backing of the HOA board. I'd later learn why. Karen didn't just complain at meetings. She dominated them. She showed up early, raised her voice, and used her exaggerated concerns to influence decisions. Some neighbors admitted to me in whispers that they were afraid to cross her, fearing she'd find a way to fine them or make their lives harder. That wasn't just annoying, it was terrifying. One elderly neighbor told me Karen once tried to report him for having a non-compliant mailbox design that had been there for 30 years. It was absurd. I was furious that someone so petty and power-hungry could have this kind of influence in a place where we were supposed to feel safe. She turned the HOA into a weapon and wielded it with precision. And yet she never seemed to face consequences herself. While others were fined for tiny infractions, her own yard often broke multiple HOA rules: an unapproved garden fence, political signs, even noise violations from weekend parties. But no fines ever came her way. What kind of system allowed this? I started digging deeper. The more I looked into it, the more I realized Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was manipulating the HOA to enforce her personal vendettas, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it anymore. I was angry, yes, but I was also ready. She had no idea what was coming next. The weight of the foreclosure notice never left my mind, but as the days passed, it transformed from fear into something sharper. Purpose. I realized I couldn't just sit and hope the HOA would see reason. That $55 fine was never about the money. It was a weapon. And Karen, with her smug glances from across the street and her whispers at HOA meetings, had made sure it hit where it hurt the most. My home. I began poring over every document I could get my hands on: HOA bylaws, city zoning ordinances, property records. My dining table became a battlefield of papers, highlighters, and sticky notes. What started as an effort to defend myself quickly turned into an investigation. Patterns emerged. Karen had used her influence to push rule changes that let the HOA bypass homeowner votes. Quietly, without notice, they gave themselves the right to escalate fines into liens. I found the meeting minutes where the change had passed, with only Karen and two of her closest allies present. But it didn't stop there. I discovered several properties on our street had faced sudden, harsh penalties, and each of those homeowners had previously clashed with Karen. Coincidence? No. This was a campaign. Organized, deliberate, and cruel. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages of violation notices that shared the same wording, the same timeline, and the same result. Threats of foreclosure. I knew I couldn't win this alone. That's when I finally called my father. A feared attorney with decades of courtroom victories under his belt, he listened quietly as I explained everything. Then he said 5 words that gave me more strength than I'd felt in weeks. They messed with the wrong family. From that moment on, it wasn't just about saving my house. It was about exposing every crooked step Karen and the HOA had taken. The fight was no longer personal, it was war. And I was ready. While I had been digging through HOA bylaws and trying to stay one step ahead of Karen's next move, I hadn't yet realized how deeply rooted the injustice truly was, until my father, the man I'd always admired for his fierce integrity in the courtroom, walked through my front door with a dusty leather briefcase in hand. He sat down at the dining table, glanced at my clutter of paperwork, and calmly said, "Let's take a closer look at what they've done." For the next 2 hours, we combed through the HOA's foreclosure documents line by line. It was then, while flipping through the so-called lien approval notice, that he suddenly stopped, his brow furrowing. "This isn't just sloppy," he muttered. It's illegal." He pointed to a single date, seemingly insignificant to me. "They issued the lien before the final notice was even mailed. That's a clear violation of both state and HOA procedural law." My heart skipped a beat. Could that be it? Could one overlooked timestamp prove their entire case was built on shaky ground? But he wasn't done. Dad opened his briefcase and pulled out something I hadn't seen in years, an old HOA legal manual he'd helped author as a consultant decades ago. "They used this same clause," he said, flipping to a tabbed page. "But they've modified it. Illegally, they removed the homeowner protection paragraph." That's when it hit me. This wasn't an isolated mistake. It was part of a broader scheme to give the HOA unchecked power, and Karen had taken full advantage of it. I looked at my father, stunned, as he tapped his pen against the altered document. "We're not just fighting a $55 fine anymore," he said. "We're going to unravel the whole mess." It was the breakthrough I didn't know I needed. The narrative had shifted. I wasn't the one on trial. Karen and the HOA were. And thanks to my father's sharp legal eye, we now had the proof to turn the tide. Curiosity and tension buzzed through the air as I sat down at my desk that evening, the glow of my laptop illuminating a stack of carefully organized documents. After everything I had uncovered, the wrongful lien, the procedural violations, and Karen's obsessive campaign against me, I knew it was time to take the fight public. I opened a blank social media post and hesitated for only a second before uploading the photo of the foreclosure notice with the caption, "Would you lose your home over a $55 fine? I just might." I didn't expect what happened next. Within hours, the post had exploded. Comments poured in from neighbors, friends, even strangers across town. "This is outrageous," one person wrote. "We need to know more," another demanded. Many of them asked what they could do to help, and some even shared eerily similar experiences with the same HOA. As the buzz grew, so did the pressure. My inbox filled with screenshots of Karen's past behavior, notes she'd left on people's doors, footage from security cams of her trespassing, and fines issued for things like too many wind chimes or excessively joyful lawn decorations. It was like pulling a thread and watching an entire web unravel. The real turning point came when a local journalist messaged me. She'd seen my story gaining traction and wanted to do a piece for the evening news. I agreed, and the next day she showed up at my house with a small crew. I laid out the timeline, the altered bylaws, and most importantly, the evidence my father and I had uncovered. The reporter's eyebrows raised as I explained how the HOA skipped mandatory steps before placing the lien, something that could make their entire foreclosure invalid. The news segment aired that evening under the title, $55 Fine, Foreclosed Dreams, When HOAs Go Too Far. The response was immediate and electric. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years started calling, sharing their own horror stories. Some admitted they'd stayed quiet out of fear. But now they were ready to speak up. Karen, however, wasn't ready for this kind of attention. The next morning, she posted a statement online calling the story misleading, accusing me of twisting the truth. But by then, it was too late. The truth was out there, and the community was listening, not to her denials, but to each other. As I walked through the neighborhood that week, I saw changes I never thought possible. People waved with knowing looks. Some stopped to thank me. Others whispered, "Keep going." The silence that once gave the HOA unchecked power had cracked wide open. And through that opening, light was finally starting to shine. The night of the HOA meeting had finally arrived, and the air in the community center was thick with unease. Rows of folding chairs filled with homeowners buzzed with whispers, eyebrows raised, heads shaking. Everyone had heard the rumors, the fine, the foreclosure, the viral story, and everyone was waiting for a showdown. Karen stood near the podium, gripping her glittery gavel like it was a weapon. Her face wore a mask of confidence, but I noticed the tightness in her jaw and the way her eyes flicked nervously around the room. I stepped in just moments before the meeting started. My dad walked beside me, a calm but imposing presence in his tailored suit. His mere arrival turned heads. Whispers followed us to our seats. I opened my folder, revealing a perfectly arranged collection of maps, legal records, and proof. We were ready. Karen called the meeting to order, her voice sharper than usual. "Tonight," she began, "we'll be discussing disruptive behavior, repeated violations, and foreclosure proceedings concerning Mr. Nathan Reed's property." She shot me a look, smug and defiant. I raised my hand. Karen rolled her eyes. "You may speak, Mr. Reed, but let's keep this civil." "Oh, I plan to," I said calmly as I stood. "Because civil is exactly what you haven't been." Gasps broke out. Karen's face twitched. I walked to the front, pulled out a printed timeline of the entire dispute, and clipped it to the presentation board. "This," I said, tapping the paper, "is what really happened. The $55 fine, issued with no notice, no second warning, and no chance to resolve, a violation of HOA procedure." Karen scoffed. "That's how it works. Read the bylaws." My dad stood next. "Actually," he said, "let's read them together." His voice was calm, steady, but filled the room with the quiet authority of someone who knew the law like a second language. He opened a binder and quoted HOA Bylaw 7.3. "All fines must include a written warning, a 14-day grace period, and a right to appeal prior to escalation, none of which happened." Karen froze. He continued, flipping through documents. "Furthermore, Section 9. clearly states that foreclosure cannot proceed unless the debt exceeds $600 and multiple warnings have been sent. This was a $55 fine. No warnings, no appeals, just intimidation. A board member shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Is that accurate?" Karen raised her voice. "It's standard. He's been disruptive. It's not just about the fine." "But the foreclosure notice only lists the fine," I replied. "You've got nothing else on me." Murmurs turned into full-blown debate. Neighbors stood up, demanding to know how many others had been fined without warning. Mrs. Chavez said she'd paid a $150 fine for faded mailbox paint, but never received a written notice. Mr. Green had been fined $90 for weeds that weren't even on his property. The board was losing control. Karen slammed the gavel. "This is a witch hunt!" My dad calmly placed his final document on the table. "This," he said, "is a cease and desist letter prepared by our legal counsel, along with a civil suit for wrongful foreclosure, emotional distress, and property harassment. Unless this HOA immediately voids the foreclosure and issues a formal apology." Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The board president, an older man who'd previously kept quiet, finally spoke up. "I think we need to discuss this privately." "Good," my dad said, "because tomorrow morning we're taking this to court." The next day, the courtroom was silent and formal. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands steady, my father beside me. Karen entered wearing her signature pearls and a new blazer, her attorney in tow. But her usual swagger was gone. She wouldn't even look at me. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, peered over her glasses as she reviewed the documentation. "Let me understand this. A $55 fine, with no warnings or hearings, led to a foreclosure notice?" Karen's attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client acted within the HOA's discretionary powers." "Discretionary powers," the judge repeated flatly, "do not override due process." We presented every piece of evidence: photos, bylaws, emails, even screenshots of Karen's social media posts mocking lazy neighbors who can't follow simple rules. The final nail came when we played audio from the HOA meeting, catching Karen saying, "If he wants to play hardball, I'll make him wish he never moved here." The judge leaned forward. "Miss Jenkins, is this your voice?" Karen looked pale. I was frustrated. "Save it," the judge said. "Mr. Reed, your rights were clearly violated. I'm issuing an injunction to void the foreclosure and ordering the HOA to pay all legal fees and damages." The gavel slammed. Karen buried her face in her hands. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Neighbors texted one another. The news reporter, who had been following the case, posted an update live from the hallway. "Local man wins lawsuit against HOA over $55 fine. Justice served." I walked out of the courtroom with my dad beside me, both of us silent for a moment before exchanging a glance of exhausted relief. The fight wasn't just about me anymore. It had become a reckoning. And the reckoning had just begun. When the court ruled in my favor, I wasn't just relieved, I was transformed. The judgment wasn't merely a legal win. It was a powerful reminder that no one, not even a well-connected HOA board, is above the rules. That $55 fine, which at first felt like a minor nuisance, had spiraled into a battle for my home, my dignity, and my peace of mind. But through persistence, calm research, and the unwavering support of my father, an experienced attorney, I had weathered the storm and come out stronger. In the days following the verdict, neighbors I barely knew came up to me, shook my hand, and thanked me. They shared their own stories of quiet frustration, unfair fees, and the fear of speaking up. Some had lived in the neighborhood for decades, yet they'd felt powerless against the HOA's unreasonable rules and Karen's domineering presence. But now, the tide had turned. One of the most important lessons I learned is that truth, when pursued with patience and clarity, can be stronger than fear or intimidation. As we grow older, many of us have seen how systems, whether it's an HOA, a local council, or a corporation, can sometimes forget the human beings they were meant to serve. That's when we must remember our voice and the power it holds when used with grace and wisdom. This experience also reminded me of something my father used to say when I was young. The law should protect people, not scare them. He helped me see that knowing your rights, keeping records, and standing calmly in the face of injustice isn't just about protecting your property. It's about protecting your peace of mind, especially for seniors who are often targeted because they're seen as less likely to fight. It's crucial to remember that age brings not just wisdom, but strength in quiet forms, like resilience, perspective, and community leadership. In many ways, the biggest victory wasn't winning in court, it was changing our neighborhood. After Karen stepped down, a new HOA board was elected, one made up of longtime residents who genuinely cared about the community. The new policies focused on fairness, transparency, and compassion. Seniors who had once felt bullied by unfair rules were now being supported, whether it was through waived fees for medical hardship or volunteers helping maintain lawns for neighbors with limited mobility. I've also come to believe that legacy isn't just about what we leave behind in our wills or retirement accounts. It's about how we stand up when it matters, how we teach our children and grandchildren to be brave and kind, and how we protect the spaces we call home. A house, after all, is more than walls and a roof. It holds decades of love, loss, laughter, and stories. And defending that is always worth it. Now, when I sit on my porch in the evening, sipping coffee and watching the neighborhood children play freely on the sidewalks, I feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace and pride, not just in myself, but in a community that stood together when it mattered most. To anyone who feels small or afraid to speak up, especially older adults who think their voice no longer matters, I say this: your voice might just be the one that inspires others to act. Never underestimate the ripple effect of your courage, because sometimes the greatest victories come not from shouting the loudest, but from standing your ground with quiet strength and letting the truth speak for itself.